Good evening and welcome to the regular board meeting for December the 8th. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and if we could please rise for the land acknowledgement and national anthem.
We would like to acknowledge
that we are here today
on the traditional territory
of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation.
Nous tenons à reconnaître que nous sommes sur le territoire traditionnel
des Mississaugas de la
Première Nation de Credit.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. Quand on grâce est porté le pays, il s'est porté la croix, ton histoire.
Thank you. Approve of the agenda. The agenda is to be amended to include reports from 8.3a, Ministry of Education Directions to the Peel District School Board. That report has been distributed. 8.4, Centering Student Well-Being and Success, Review of Suspension Protocols and Evaluation of Social Emotional Learning Skills, grades 1 to 8. That's a new title and the report has been distributed. And finally, 8.6, Peel District School Board Teacher Hiring Policy Development, and that report has also been distributed this evening. With those changes, I approve the agenda as amended. There are no special presentations this evening. I have no conflicts of interest to declare. The regular meeting of the board minutes, November the 24th, 2020, have had an opportunity to read them, and I approve the minutes of the regular board meeting, November 24th, 2020. There are no notices of motion or petitions this evening, and we're now on item number 5 of the agenda, 5.1, retirements. I would like to congratulate the following retirees: Zbigniew Anishkevich, Angela Baldaja, Brenda Crow, Pablo Delfino, Nella Di Cosalo, Rosetta Friedrich, Maureen Hudds, Catherine Hutchins, Deborah Jackson, Jennifer Little, David Marcotte, Rosalie Martin, Maria Miranda, Anna Trapani, Debbie Warren, and that's all of them this evening. Thank you to all of you for your many years of dedicated service to the Peel District School Board, and we wish you every success in your future endeavors. (5.2) Christian Heritage Month. Through a series of motions and as part of the Peel District School Board's commitment to equity and inclusion, the Peel Board recognizes and celebrates a number of months of recognition. In December, we acknowledge Christian Heritage Month in recognition of the significant contributions and achievements of Christian Canadians and communities throughout the world. Christian Canadians are integral to our community and contribute in many ways to the economic, political, social, cultural, and charitable fabric of Peel. This declaration gives the Peel District School Board the opportunity to recognize the many Christian staff, students, and families within our community and wish them well during this holy month, which culminates in the celebration of Christmas. We have no delegations this evening, and there is no new business to add to the agenda. We are now on item number 8, reports from Director and Staff. 8.1, Director's Update. Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. Tonight, my director's update will focus on highlights from the recent Equity Summit in one of our families of schools and our Choose Action campaign. For the past 4 years, a group of dedicated Peel Board staff have organized an Equity Summit to support employees in their conversations and work around social justice, human rights, anti-racism, anti-Black racism, equity, and inclusion. What began as a small event held in one classroom has now grown to a multi-day summit with over 650 attendees each night. This year, the summit was held virtually on November 9th, 16th, and 23rd. The Equity Summit highlights conditions for the transformation we are pursuing in the Peel District School Board. Firstly, as you will see in the upcoming video, the educators are hopeful about a more inclusive future and have embraced a willingness to be challenged. Their openness, regardless of their social location, to having their beliefs and practices questioned by others is a profoundly important equity, leadership, and global competency. Both individually and collectively, we must be willing to be disturbed, to learn, unlearn, and relearn together in order to develop a more responsive, anti-racist, and anti-oppressive practices in classrooms and in offices. Secondly, the summit shows change has begun from inside our schools, when a few staff noticed something that they would not tolerate, something they wanted to learn, and shared an aspiration for a better future. Their conference didn't start with a supervisor's direction. Rather, it began with passion and a commitment to learning, well-being, and equity. Before we view a brief video summarizing this exciting event, I'd like to take a moment to recognize and applaud the work of the summit organizers, including Francine Tulloch-Harvey, Vice Principal at Red Willow Public School, Shauna Sargent, Vice Principal at Settlers Green Public School, Jonathan Temporal, Vice Principal at McCrimmon Public School, Avni Chauhan, Resource Teacher with Social Emotional Learning and Wellbeing, Laura Temporal, Course Director at York University, as well as many others who've gone above and beyond to organize this valuable learning experience for Peel Board staff.
It was born out of, the very first one was born out of a need that educators who were working with the children every single day had to ensure that our practice met the needs of our students.
It began with a couple of speakers and asking some of our Peel colleagues to speak on a variety of topics, equity issues. And when we did the first year, we had a great response, and the response kept growing. We had people asking and seeking us out to do it again. So we continued, and it grew to over 400 people coming in person for an evening of learning.
We ended up expanding our team of organizers, right? So that was really helpful because it allowed us to get input from a variety of different people experiencing a variety of different things in their own spaces across a variety of grade levels. And so that allowed the summit to sort of meet the needs of kindergarten right through to high school, the end of high school, but also recognizing that we also needed to meet the needs of other employee groups in the board, because they also are the frontline workers working with our families and our students every single day.
You know, our most recent summit, which I won't talk too much about. I'll throw to Agni next for that. But I think that really typifies what we were thinking in the moment and kind of hearing from colleagues in the times of COVID and in the time of the ministry review in our board and in the time of kind of the mass uprisings, not only in Canada, but in the US and worldwide, of what our summit needed to look like this year.
We were able to put it into a virtual platform and reach that many more folks. We also had to address what was going on at home with us in Peel, and that was being responsive to the ministry report. There was a dire need to address and respond to the needs of the system that we support. So this led to us specifically choosing the 3 speakers who could help us support all of our students, but specifically support our Black students who were in most need. With that, we asked Paul Gorski, Dr. Nicole Westburns, Karen Murray, and Dr. Andrew Campbell to help support our summit by speaking and share a little bit about how all of our frontline workers, how all of us could go from theory to practice in supporting all students.
We had about 108 persons respond in terms of feedback. Each night, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of around 600 viewers visiting us, which was wonderful. But from those 108 folks who responded to our feedback survey, 94.4% said, yes, I plan to make changes and apply my learning as a result of these presentations. And 5.6% who said, I'm already doing these things, but it really has reaffirmed some of my learning. And other folks were talking about how, if offered by our board, would we plan to attend a summit of this type again? 98.1% said yes. So I think those are pretty great statistics to have.
Having an event like this, not only for the new learning, but to sustain the people who are already doing it is so important. And I think, that really needs to be highlighted.
Yeah, one of the comments that really stood out to me when we were looking at feedback was, this work has always been important, and interestingly, many of us have been doing the work. However, these platforms, so like the summit, these platforms offer us both the language to describe the work we're doing and ways to improve the work we're doing.
There have been countless emails that have been sent to us, sort of expressing in words the impact that the summit has had. Hopefully, our board will be able to continue them going forward, continue to meet needs when it has to do with ensuring that all of our students are valued and heard, and feeling that they definitely are going to be missed if they're not in our board, each and every single one of them. So that's the Equity Summit.
Thank you again to all of the staff who contributed to making this year's Equity Summit possible. Each year, the Peel District School Board acknowledges Bullying Awareness and Prevention Week so that we can never forget the detrimental impact that bullying in all its forms has on students. Although the pandemic has presented new challenges for our schools and communities, we are launching our anti-bullying campaign from December 7th through 11th, and we've asked students, staff, and families to choose action to be anti-racist in their classes, schools, work sites, and communities. Our goal is to proactively eliminate racial discrimination each and every day. This is the transformational change that is required for all students, regardless of their identity, to feel safe, included, and respected in our schools. The actions required to become anti-racist staff and educators are not achieved in a single week. It's a pattern of behavior, decisions, actions, and words. This week is but one important step in changing expectations and signaling to everyone in the Peel District School Board that silence and complicity that have left Black, African, and Caribbean, Indigenous, Muslim, 2S LGBTQ, Jewish students, and many others feeling underserved and marginalized is no longer acceptable. I know that Peel District School Board staff are committed to ensuring that all classrooms are nurturing spaces that embrace and foster the best in all young people. Here are some of the ways that we're committing to be anti-racist.
The Peel District School Board is vast and is situated on treaties 13A, 14, and 19 of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I am grateful to the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation as caretakers of this land and recognize the benefits I received from this land. I also acknowledge and give thanks to the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples who have walked before us. This land continues to be home for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, many of who are students in Peel schools. Bullying Prevention Week highlights our commitment to be anti-racist, not just during this week, but beyond. One of the ways to continue to honor this commitment is to recognize my responsibility as a treaty person to combat anti-Indigenous racism by naming and addressing it when it occurs. Each year, the Peel District School Board acknowledges Bullying Awareness and Prevention Week. Although the pandemic has presented new challenges for our schools and communities, our commitment to prevent and end bullying remains strong. This year, and for every day moving forward, we must show commitment to acting to be anti-racist. As a learning organization, we know that equity work and our acknowledgement and understanding of the various forms of racism is critical so that all students, regardless of their racial identity, feel safe, included, and respected. Disrupting and dismantling all forms of racism is work that cannot wait. In order to be anti-racist, we must challenge ideas of color blindness or race neutrality. As director, I'm asking us all to commit to center the lived experiences and intersectional identities of students, including race, religion, gender, ability, and sexuality. By doing this, we can help co-create learning spaces where everyone, including those who've been historically marginalized and underserved, can achieve success and a sense of belonging in PDSB schools.
Notice, name, confront. Notice the interactions, the flow of power between and among students, staff, and community members. Name the anti-Black racism and other manifestations of racism when they occur in our learning and working environments. Confront. Have a plan to redress the hurt and harm and to educate. Restoring equity and inclusion in our system is an everyday, ongoing activity.
It's looking at current systems and practices in a different perspective Anti-racism is determining who is being favored or oppressed. It is the current status quo supporting people of all backgrounds, Black, Indigenous, racialized, and underserved communities. Anti-racism means challenging, disrupting, and dismantling systems that have historically hurt and held back specific groups of people in our society. Anti-racism is about being brave and putting theory into practice.
In my current role as acting associate director, I think the most important thing that I can do is to listen, to really actively listen to others and to seek to understand what they're telling me, what I'm hearing in their voices. I think it's important as I work with people in the board office, as I work with our superintendents, as I have interactions and work with our parents, but most especially when I work with our students, I need to listen to their voices. I have to understand. At the same time, I need to ask questions. I ask questions for my own learning, but I also have to ask those tough questions of others so that I can maybe disrupt their thinking a little bit and maybe just make them feel a little bit more uncomfortable as they seek to understand and listen as well.
It means be a co-conspirator. Don't just talk the talk, take action to identify, name, and interrupt racism and oppression, especially if you identify as white. Call people in and be part of co-constructing a future where all identities are valued and have voice.
To choose action for me means to be personally accountable. As well, it also means to support my administrators as they work in their schools to dismantle anti-Black racism. So anything I can do that allows them to do the work more easily and more effectively would be to choose action.
To be an anti-racist educator is to learn about the meaning of anti-Black racism, to understand how anti-Black racism shows up in our school settings, in curriculum, in discipline and pathways. The second thing would be to speak up when you're hearing racist comments, anti-Black racist comments, anti-Indigenous comments. Speak up, use your voice, empower not only yourself, but all those around you.
For me personally, it means making conscious daily decisions to address racism at the interpersonal, institutional, and structural levels, in addition to that of the individual.
I have a favorite quote that says, "You can't make the other person feel important in your presence if secretly you think that they're a nobody." And so being anti-racist for me means continuously educating myself, asserting myself in situations where it's deemed necessary, and inspiring others to do exactly the same.
I think it's really important that we name and interrupt acts of racism in the moment, no matter how micro or macro. It may feel awkward, but it's necessary.
So what does it mean to be an anti-racist? To me, it means practicing humility, listening to those who have been impacted by racial bullying and violence, and resisting the urge to deny the racism. It also means practicing integrity. When you see individual acts of racism or systemic racism, you have to call it out because we know racism dehumanizes people.
Recently, staff shared resources with all principals and vice principals to support the important focus on Bullying Awareness and Prevention Week. These resources aim to build safe and positive climates for learning that are free from racial bullying and other forms of discrimination. Every day, myself and the senior team expect all of us to choose action to be anti-racist, because being not racist isn't good enough. I encourage all students and staff to use the Choose Action hashtag and share how you will confront racial bullying by thinking about what you will do, what you will say, and what attitude you will have that will help you and others to choose action to be an anti-racist.
Thank you very much to all of the staff and our media services team who put the video together for our schools and our departments. And lastly, Supervisor Rodriguez, as you know, the Government of Ontario has made a commitment and taken steps to keep schools open during the pandemic. We know that conditions during the pandemic can in fact change very quickly. And that's why the ministry has asked school boards to ensure that they have a contingency plan for remote learning in the unlikely event that schools are directed by the government to move to remote learning at any point in the school year. We will be sharing our contingency plan with our system leaders tomorrow, just in case. It is our strategy for remaining confident and agile in our response as a system to any future changes in conditions created by the pandemic, and while staying focused on keeping our students and staff safe and continuing our students' learning under any conditions. It is said that chance favors the prepared. So in closing, thank you very much, and that concludes the director's update for this evening.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins. Really enjoyed the two videos that you put together. Moving on to 8.2, COVID-19 school planning update, number 4, Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. This report is a milestone in the Peel District School Board's journey of transformation. As you know, in March 2020, the Ministry of Education issued a report on the Peel District School Board outlining observations and recommendations with respect to systemic discrimination, specifically anti-Black racism, human resource practices, board leadership, and issues of governance. The report contained 27 ministerial directives that the Peel District School Board started working on last March. Admittedly, since entering the Peel District School Board in the middle of the summer, it was a slower than anticipated start in continuing work on the directives, but it certainly has been a busy fall. You will see in this report that over the course of the fall, we have reframed the directives so that they are infused throughout the organization and implemented as strategies for deep and sustained change that matters to students, staff, and families, rather than being implemented as a checklist. We have organized the directives under relationships, leadership capacity, student learning and well-being, and of course, accountability. This report also explains that the transformation required of the Peel District School Board is not limited solely to the directives. There is more we can and must do to ensure that all students, especially those who've been underserved, are nurtured, respected, and given what they need in order to be successful. I am optimistic that the tentative plan outlined within this report will situate us to make meaningful change for our students. You will see within the report actions and aspirations. For example, over a quarter of our secondary schools next year will do stream grade 9 science, geography, or French. We have restarted relationships with communities by involving them in implementing the directives, such as looking at student relationships through discipline, where we have a committee of community members, parents, as well as staff. We're reviewing all of our policies with a view to ensuring that equity, anti-racism, and anti-oppression is woven throughout all of our policies. And we have started professional learning in many different aspects of our organization. Our work continues. You will see revised timelines also included in this report, and it is that certainly our hope and our goal that in March we will be able to celebrate all of the achievements and the true and lasting changes that are being made, not just because of the directives, but because of our commitments to doing better than the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins. I have just a couple of comments and a couple of very brief questions on this report. First, thank you for this work. It is extremely well done and valuable. The framework is of immense help in situating the work of the directives, but more importantly, I think it provides depth and understanding to the work. I would also like to note that 19 directives are highlighted with this work, and the first 8 are essentially the work of the board. For the most part, involve the nuts and bolts tasks that need to be completed and are all in the process of being completed and will be highlighted later on this evening in one of the reports. Under the relationships, leadership, capacity building section, student learning, well-being, accountability, those were the framework, we recognize that these are not mutually exclusive, but rather have many points of intersection. Has there been some thought to those points of intersection? If there has been, could you share with us perhaps just one so we can kind of at least understand publicly as to how they will work with one another?
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. In fact, as we looked to ensure that we were coherently implementing the directives, we found, in fact, that the Equity Action Plan overlapped with our action plan for de-streaming and overlapped with the leadership required to ensure that progress was made in supporting de-streaming successfully. And it overlapped with our accountability to our students and our communities. So that's just one example of how we are weaving a thread between and among the actions and the directives. And while de-streaming certainly sits under student learning and well-being, it connects to capacity building, it connects to accountability, and it certainly connects to the relationships that we're seeking to create.
Thank you. Leadership and capacity building for senior staff. Also want to point out publicly that trustees are also well engaged with learning through Directive 6, and that too has been ongoing, and we've been able to tap into some of the same folks that the senior team is working with, and this ensures continuity of learning and consistency of approach and understanding. So thank you for supporting us with that work as well, away from the board table. My next question is, under the accountability section of the framework, there is a great deal of comfort with quantitative accountability. Is research and others working on some metrics around the qualitative accountability piece?
Thank you for that question, Supervisor Rodriguez. One of the key tasks of Lynn Strangway, who has joined our senior team recently, is to work with our research department to look at the qualitative data that we can use to ensure that our students, our families, and our staff are in fact actually feeling the transformation that it is that we are seeking. So we look forward to bringing back that research framework and sharing it with the board and weaving it into our next update on the directives.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins. Finally, just a comment. I really like the section on moving beyond the directives and certainly encourage staff to keep focused on that. We recognize that the directives are a starting point and not intended to just check a box without ensuring sustainable change. I was also very pleased to see the revised timelines, which will certainly guide the work to lasting change. So thank you for that report. It really, I think, encapsulated and put together the entire framework so that we can have an understanding of the directives from that rich framework. So thank you. I approve the report. I'd like to just go back to item 8.2 for a moment. COVID-19 school planning update. I believe somebody might be on the line, Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. I would invite Superintendent Ted Byers to provide us with an update.
Thank you, and through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, it's my pleasure to bring this oral report this evening. Can you hear me all right?
We can, thank you.
Great. So it is my pleasure to bring this oral report on Peel's COVID school planning update to the meeting this evening. In my report at the last board meeting, I provided an overview of the COVID team and their responsibilities in supporting safety in our school for students and staff. In this evening's report, I'd like to provide updates regarding two significant changes to process that have emerged in recent days. But before I do so, I would like to emphasize something which I hear in my regular meetings with Peel Public Health, which is their very complimentary report on the work that is being done daily across our system in our schools. We have all heard about the increase in incidence of COVID in the Peel region. This can manifest in schools in different ways. For example, someone might come to the school with the infection which they had acquired elsewhere. In this situation, we respond as soon as we hear about symptoms or a positive test, and Peel Health works with us to consider who might have been close contacts. While these are concerning situations, they are certainly a result of the high incidence in our community. But the good news in those situations, in the vast majority of cases, is that there is no transmission to another individual within the school. That scenario of in-school transmission, which the health department would call an outbreak, is very low in our schools. And this is because of the conscientious work of all Peel staff in maintaining strict adherence to our safety protocols, appropriate use of protective equipment, and other protective protocols. This adherence to safety and the very low instance of in-school transmission should give us confidence that we are doing our very best to support our Peel community. So first I'd like to speak about on-site COVID testing in Peel District School Board schools. On the 26th of November, the Ministry of Education announced the launch of voluntary school-based COVID testing in 4 regions of the province, which currently have high number of active COVID-19 cases. A Peel region was identified for this initiative together with 3 other regions in the province, Toronto, York, and Ottawa. As part of this evening's agenda package, item 10.1 is the letter to the board from Dr. Lowe, Peel's Medical Officer of Health, in which he introduces the program to the region. In the Peel Board, we are working closely with our health care partners in the local health unit, Peel Public Health, as well as our partners in the Ontario Health LHINs of Mississauga, Halton, and the Central West regions. Testing is voluntary, but is clearly encouraged for reasons which Dr. Lowe identifies in his letter. Now, I've said earlier that we've had very low instance of in-school transmission. So you might wonder why on-site testing is being indicated by health units in our area. The answer, as Dr. Lowe says, is first to detect asymptomatic cases and to manage outbreaks. But secondly, and maybe even more importantly, to help students and families who would like to get a test by removing some of the barriers to testing, such as location or appointment times or lack of transportation. And this is an important service we can provide to our community. And certainly to do so is to encourage greater uptake in testing in a familiar location with a familiar face. So how are these school sites chosen for on-site testing? To date, we have had 3 of these clinics in Peel District School Board schools, with more clinics planned in the next days and week. Locations are identified by Peel Public Health where a case of in-school transmission might have occurred or where there is a high incidence of community transmission. Our clinics have been held after the school day, and the students and their families have been invited to come without an appointment. Testing is provided even if an individual has no health card or has inadvertently left it at home. You may be aware that a variety of testing methodologies are being used by health units. These clinics are most commonly adopting a saliva test, which is less intrusive than other tests. But this decision is made by the clinicians based on test availability. In preparation for these clinics, our COVID team works closely with the school administration, our communications team, and our facilities and security departments to ensure that the operation is practiced and efficient. And I'm pleased to tell you that our principals report that families are grateful for the opportunity to receive this testing in a known local location. Secondly, this evening, I would also like to report on an important change which has been implemented by Peel Public Health in the COVID screening tool for students. The health department has identified a list of symptoms which might indicate the onset of COVID infection. These symptoms range from fever or chills with a temperature of 100 degrees or more, or barking cough such as croup, or shortness of breath, etc. A total of 9 symptoms associated with COVID infection. You may be aware that at the start of the school year, the health department direction was that students should stay home and seek testing if they exhibited one of those symptoms. Later, however, the direction was loosened so that students would need to identify 2 such symptoms before testing or isolation was recommended. But now, as of yesterday, Peel Health has returned to 1 symptom screening. So why have they tightened these directions? Well, while I can't speak for the health department, I expect we can all understand their goal, our goal, of constraining the further spread of COVID to the extent that we possibly can. These restrictions are, perhaps not surprisingly, leading to many questions from schools and our communities, but the answers to those questions lie in our common goal to implement strong safety measures to protect our students and families, and to reduce anxiety through confidence and reassurance. I'm grateful to our resilient staff and administrators in all of our schools who answer these questions, respond with comfort and understanding, and provide places of calm amongst a sea of uncertainty. This move to single symptom screening will remain in effect until Peel Health announces a change. Of note, this same change to student screening has also been implemented for our neighbours in Toronto. Thank you, and through you, Supervisor, this is my report for this evening, and I would certainly be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Superintendent Byers, and thank you, Director Russell Rollins. Thank you for the report. I have no questions. Thanks to you and your team for your timely responsiveness in this ever-changing landscape and for bringing us the updated information. Thanks again. Moving on to 8.3B, Directive 5, Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. I believe that Lori Barnes is on the line. Ms. Barnes has been working to prepare the bylaws for this evening, and she will present them to us.
Thank you, Director. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can, Ms. Barnes. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Rodriguez, for the opportunity to provide some context regarding the new board bylaws for the Peel District School Board. My remarks this evening include a brief background, 2 major themes, as well as some highlights about structural changes. Before I begin, however, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to Donna Baptiste, Janice Mueller, Nicole Fernandez, Marina Amin, and Lorelei Fernandez, who provided excellent assistance and practical insights for this work. I would also like to acknowledge the significant contribution from legal counsel Sheila McKinnon regarding statutory requirements and parliamentary procedure. The new bylaws provide a framework for the board's decision-making responsibilities and include rules of order for its work at the committee level. They incorporate recommendations and rationale from previous effective governance reports, as noted throughout pages 17 to 32 of the board meeting agenda. There are 2 very important themes integrated throughout these bylaws. The first is the board's commitment to equity and inclusivity. I am referring in particular to section 2.1.3 on page 9 of the bylaws, which reads as follows. The Peel District School Board is committed to building learning and working environments that are free from any form of bias, racism, and/or discrimination, and to creating a climate of understanding and mutual respect for the dignity and worth of each person, so that each person feels a part of the board community. The board will provide all students with optimal and inclusive learning opportunities, regardless of race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age, marital status, family status, or disability, and any other grounds protected under the Ontario Human Rights Code. It is my belief that the Peel District School Board will be the very first school board in the province of Ontario to include this important commitment to its students and community in its official bylaws. In addition, every board committee is now required to ensure that its deliberations are undertaken with the intent to achieve the goals of equity, decolonization, inclusion, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and accessibility, and in compliance with the board's obligations under the Human Rights Code and related policies. This commitment can be found throughout the governance directives for board committees outlined on pages 46 to 71. The second theme I would like to highlight is comprised of two related components: enhanced public participation in the board's decision-making process and increased access to information about the board's work. Board committees are now required to provide the educational community with an opportunity to provide input to inform the committee's decision-making process related to student learning, equity, and well-being. The bylaws also prescribe the community's involvement in the board's multi-year strategic plan and its policy development and review process, which are two of the board's most important obligations. Governance directives have been introduced and are appended to the bylaws beginning on page 46. These documents outline how specific aspects of the board's governance responsibilities are organized and executed. For example, a new governance directive for public participation and delegations is outlined on pages 72 to 80. Delegates will no longer be received at board meetings. They will be welcomed instead at any one of the board's 3 standing committees, aligned with subject matter related to the committee's terms of reference. In some cases, they may be also scheduled at a committee of the whole meeting. This structure will provide further opportunities for public engagement by allocating additional meeting time for trustees to receive delegations. The governance directives also require that committee minutes be included in the board meeting agenda, subject to applicable legislation, to keep the community informed about the board's work. In addition to the themes I have described, significant changes have been made to the board's committee meeting structure, including reporting lines and expanded responsibilities, particularly for the board's 3 standing committees. These modifications are outlined in section 4 of the bylaws and on pages 46 to 60 of the governance directives. A new board and agenda review committee will also be constituted to consider system-wide and external governance matters, such as the development of an annual work plan for the board, recommendations regarding board committees, and communications from the Ministry of Education and other educational partners. Further details are found on pages 46 to 48. And finally, sections 5 and 6 of the bylaws provide direction regarding parliamentary procedure and the board's governance and accountability framework. In conclusion, I would like to leave you with these final thoughts. Effective governance has but one purpose in public education: to contribute to better learning outcomes for each and every student. Effective governance is a framework for informed and strategic decision-making that is based on respectful interaction with every single person, student, staff member, and family who is a member of the Peel community. I am very confident that the new board bylaws and the implementation of the recommendations in previous effective governance reports will provide many opportunities for trustees and staff to bring about authentic and lasting change for the students and families you serve. This concludes my remarks, and I would be pleased to address any questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Barnes, and thank you for your clear and comprehensive presentation and report this evening. Let me just take a moment because of the recommendations and reiterate first that the first 2 recommendations on the table this evening on the revocation of the current bylaws and the adoption of the new bylaws will occur at a later date determined by me once we have had some time as a board to receive the necessary in service and becoming familiar with the new bylaws. This work will be undertaken in congruence with recommendations 5 and 6 this evening on this report agenda, on the report that this is on the agenda. I also want to commend you for highlighting those 2 themes, Ms. Barnes. The first one around equity and inclusion, which is an extremely important theme that runs throughout the report, specifically the piece on page 22 of the agenda that you highlighted as well. And secondly, the theme around stakeholder participation and involvement, which I find also necessary and something that runs throughout the new bylaws. I want to commend you as well for the work that you've put in order to provide us in being in a good place to start the future work of the board. And just one sort of question briefly, if you could comment on the board member code of conduct and complaint protocol that is at the final part of the recommendations. If you could take a moment and just comment on that publicly for us, I would appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. The Ministry of Education's Directive 3 effectively suspended the work of the Integrity Commissioner for the Peel District School Board during the period of supervision. Work on the board's code of conduct and related complaint protocol was therefore paused following consultation with legal counsel Sheila McKinnon, previously appointed by the board to provide advice on these matters. We anticipate that a review of the current code of conduct and complaint protocol will begin sometime in the new year, and once adopted by the board supervisor, will be appended to the new board bylaws as governance directives.
Thank you for that, Ms. Burns. And finally, again, Ms. Barnes, thank you for all of your work on our bylaws, committees, and governance structures to position this board in a good place to carry on the important work of governance. We look forward to you supporting us with some of the in-service work that will happen hopefully early in the new year. I am in receipt of the 9 recommendations and approve them being carried out as stated in the agenda. I don't believe Madam reported that you want me to read all of them. Are you comfortable with noting them as they appear? Thank you so much. Thanks again, Ms. Barnes. Appreciate your work.
It has been my pleasure.
Moving on to item 8.4, centering student well-being and success, review of suspension protocols. Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. The report before you this evening is an important one for our students. It is entitled Centering Student Wellbeing and Success. The reason that it is entitled as it is because suspensions have the potential to actually detract from students' well-being and their long-term success. The research is clear. Even one suspension at an early age can prevent a student from graduating and having their choice of post-secondary outcomes. This is a lifelong impact for a student who perhaps at age 4, 5, or 6 makes a mistake. It is incumbent upon us, if we are going to rebuild our relationship with our students, their families, and our staff, that we acknowledge that some of the suspensions that we have conducted over past years have perhaps not been fair, and that our disciplinary practices have not been applied equally across students. In fact, there are disparities based on identity, as outlined in this report. So the act of expunging the suspension records of students in kindergarten to grade 3, where legally permissible, serves a number of purposes. It signals a change to our students and our communities that we are prepared to do better, and that we believe in the potential of all of our students, and that we are prepared to live into our mission, which is to inspire success and hope. It also aligns with the recent decision by the Ministry of Education so that all school boards will cease suspending students from kindergarten to grade 3 under discretionary suspensions beginning in 2021. As you know, that was a decision made back in March of 2020 in the Peel District School Board. We are committed to achieving these changes outlined in this report while ensuring that young people learn how to engage positively with each other, solve problems, and take responsibility for the behavior. We are also committed to implementing these actions in a manner that maintains our responsibilities to protecting the well-being and safety of our staff. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about this report.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins. Certainly an important report. Thank you for the excellent report. It certainly serves as a model to demonstrate how to ensure that we are revising our policies and procedures through a lens committed to partnering with communities, students, staff, and families to eliminate the historically disproportionate outcomes and experiences among certain groups of students. I have a couple of questions primarily related to Appendix 1. First, just for clarity purposes, could you reiterate if currently there has been no student in K-3 has been suspended as of September 2020, and as for the expunging of suspension records for all K-3 students, will this mean that any student who was suspended in K-3 will also have their record expunged? And you might need me to explain that a little better if I haven't been clear.
Thank you, Supervisor Rodriguez. Associate Director Shirley Ann Teal collected the information from this past fall. And so my answer to your first question is that is correct. No students in kindergarten to grade 3 have been suspended this past fall. And I just ask Associate Director Teal to confirm that. Associate Director Teal said yes, she's confirming that. And then secondly, with regards to your subsequent question, you asked if we intend to expunge the suspension records of students in kindergarten to grade 3 to expunge their past suspension records. That is correct. That means that it would be removed out of our student information system, out of ONSIS, and then records would be removed from the Ontario student record. There is one proviso that is a legal requirement that we must maintain any suspensions for a violent incident for the period of 1 year, and then we would be looking to remove all of those documents from our system.
So again, just for clarity, if I'm a student in grade 9 and I was suspended back in grade 3 for some reason, that record would be expunged.
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, correct.
Thank you. My next question, because it comes up in this report and it then comes up in the next report, just want some clarity around disproportionality index. Because I think it's important for us to understand the appendices in terms of what it's saying and what it's not saying. So could someone please explain to us, or Director, if you could explain to us how the disproportionality index has been calculated?
Thank you, Supervisor Rodriguez. I could try, but it's probably best to ask our leader of our research team, Sophia, who is online, to answer this question.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Through you, Director Russell Rollins, to answer the question. we have actually used the census data, and actually will follow up with further information via our team to more specifically provide information in response to the calculation. But essentially, it is showing some clear patterns and trends when it comes to who and where those gaps are present with the disproportionality.
Okay, I guess more specifically, perhaps, Ms. Malik, my question is, in Appendix 1, where we have the ratio of the proportionality between the total number of students within a particular category and the 3-year running suspension, I'm just wondering, in light of the 3-year running suspension as opposed to the yearly running suspension, if that's an average of the 3, or if it's the total amount, and does that disproportionality then mean it's a 3-year disproportionality, or is it a single year the way it's been calculated?
Supervisor Rodriguez, I think we may have lost Ms. Malik. We will provide a written response to that question and provide it to you and to trustees through our trustees bulletin.
Awesome, thanks. I just think this is really important because it highlights for us, both in this report and the next report, why we're doing some of the things that we're doing. So I just want to kind of be clear. And also, Director Russell Rollins, when the research staff is doing that, would they be able to provide us also with just a little bit of understanding around what is a statistically significant factor of disproportionality? In other words, when should one ought to be concerned with a particular differential of that disproportionality? So am I to be concerned if it's 0.25? Am I to be concerned if it's 0.5? What would be an area of concern that would be raised by that disproportionality? Understanding full well that an index of 1 signifies equal representation, and an index below 1 signifies underrepresentation, and above 1 would obviously signify overrepresentation. I guess so that trustees and the public can understand, you know, when I see a disproportionality of 0.2, I should be concerned, or it's something that it's negligible, I need not worry about it. If they could provide a little bit of background on that, that would be helpful.
Thank you. We will provide a full explanation.
The other piece that I think that the staff needs to be commended about in terms of this particular appendix in the report is that the use of the indices that they've provided are not, oftentimes you get them as white population baseline comparators, and in this case they're not white population baseline indicators, but they're rather an aggregate, and I think that that's very helpful as well in terms of making sense of this particular data. So I was really happy to see that, and I wanted to compliment the staff on that particular piece. All righty, if the other pieces could be provided, that'd be great, and we can certainly move on. I approve this report, and thank you for this report, and look forward to the records of these students being expunged. 8.5, Equity of Access, Review of the Gifted Identification Process, Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. I would ask Associate Director Grewal to present this report.
Great, thank you, Director Russell Rollins, through you, Supervisor. Joining me to present this report today is Senior Psychologist Dr. Archie Kwan. Dr. Kwan is online as well. I will start in terms of background, in terms of why we're here, talking about equity of access, in terms of the review of the gifted identification process. As we know, as a board, we're undertaking a system transformation to ensure that the well-documented historical disparities and disproportionalities, outcomes in student achievement and experiences are eliminated. In particular, a focus on Black, African, Caribbean, and Indigenous students and access to programs for which they are absolutely qualified. Directive 9 states that as part of the annual Equity Accountability Report Card, the PDSB must report on clearly defined student-centered outcomes, including eliminating disparities in achievement of students from the board's various communities. So one of those areas that we are undertaking a review is around looking at the identification of students in the intellectual gifted exceptionality, along with disproportionalities and disparities in other areas. The current gifted identification process is outlined in the report. It really is a two-step process where our students engage in CCAT 7 testing. It's administered as a group for students in grade 4. And students are then also brought to an ISRC or an in-school review committee where the classroom teacher may also complete the gifted rating scale, the GRS. The GRS is a norm reference rating scale based on current theories of gifted and talented students from grades 4 to 13 years of age. It is completed by a teacher who knows the student well, and the results of the GRS are then captured over several scales, including intellectual ability, academic ability, and creativity. And then once the CCAT and the GRS are looked at kind of collectively, there might be at that point an opportunity for parents to consent to a psychoeducational assessment, and then the test results of all those various components are brought back to an ISRC or an IPRC if we're looking at identification and placement into a program. When we look at the data that is there in Appendix 1 here, it is quite evident that there are disproportionalities and disparities. So to your last question around interpreting the disproportionality index, we know if the disproportionality index equals to 1, it means we have equal representation. If it's less than 1, it's underrepresentation. If it's greater than 1, it's overrepresentation. And disproportionality index is percentage of students in a program divided by, in this case, the percentage of students in the PDSB. So that's how you determine that, and that's what you see in Appendix 1 there. Based on the student census data, it is evident that there's a significantly higher number of males identified as gifted compared to females. Males 62.7% and females 37.3%. In terms of race, and we have race data there as well, in terms of underrepresented races, there's insufficient data to share about Indigenous student representation in this exceptionality given the small sample size. And we've seen that through many of our data sets that we've presented, given where we don't have many students that are self-identifying as First Nations, Métis, or Inuit in the student census. The data reveals that the representation for Black students, so at 0.24 is the lowest of all racial groups, followed by the Middle Eastern group, 0.34. The Appendix 1 also demonstrates that gifted identification in relation to Social Vulnerabilities Index, and the SVI score is calculated analyzing a number of factors, and the factors are listed in that report, which do include things like poverty, home ownership, median household income, etc. And these disparities and disproportionalities, we know, gender, race, social vulnerability, are not solely the result of individual differences. And the research is clear, and there is evidence-based research there that multiple factors contribute to the disparities in gifted programs. And consequently, the definition and lack of cultural responsiveness of giftedness has led to the strengths and cultural assets of non-white students to go unrecognized or unsupported in schools. And we have found in Peel, given the data that we have, given the narratives, and I think we have quantitative data here, but when we look at qualitative data and listen to the narratives of students and families, we know that they feel that they are not having the same opportunity for gifted identification. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kwan, who's going to talk a little bit about what we are doing as a staff to review our gifted identification process. And we're hoping that this process will be completed by March or April of this coming year. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kwan now.
Thank you very much, Associate Director Graywall. So certainly the review of the gifted identification process is underway, and we're drawing from an equity and anti-oppressive lens. The review is examining a portfolio approach where information from all stakeholders is integrated into the decision-making process to demonstrate the full breadth.
Sorry, Dr. Kwan, we've lost you.
I apologize. Should I begin from the beginning?
No, I think you can carry on from the intersectionalities.
Okay. So the review is far-reaching, such that the core psychometric measures are being reevaluated to better reflect the strengths and the needs of Peel District School Board students. We are looking at increasing pathways for students to demonstrate high ability by utilizing additional composite scores on tests of intelligence, and when appropriate, looking at local norms rather than national norms on the CCAT. We're utilizing both teacher feedback and academic measures to identify strengths and needs, but neither should be seen as a barrier to gifted identification. We're openly acknowledging that biases exist in both formal and informal assessments and identifying strategies to mitigate against these biases. Provide staff, students, and families with information about the various profiles of students who may be gifted to disrupt current prevailing stereotypes of quiet, compliant, high-achieving, which may not always which is not always accurate, especially across genders. We are looking at authentic parent and guardian and student input, and they are important factors in the decision-making process. We will also be looking at, in terms of the psychological assessments, we will be including a social-emotional evaluation to further identify students' strengths and needs to help inform programming needs. And we will be developing materials to facilitate teacher and parent learning to better understand the gifted student profile, especially from underrepresented student populations. That is a summary of some of the work that we're working on now with respect to the gifted identification process.
Thank you, Edie Graywall, and thank you, Dr. Kwan. Thank you, Director Russell Rollins. I do have a few questions about this particular report. Again, just acknowledgement of the disparity and the open, transparent piece around the bias that's present was refreshing to see, and thank you for another good report this evening. There is the combination of the CCAT 7 and the GRS, and it determines, with approval, determines if the student proceeds for a psych ed. Is there a weighted rating for these two scales? Dr. Kwan?
Yes, so at the current time, if a student achieves, let's say, 98th percentile on the CCAT over three scores, could be either the verbal score, the composite score, or what we do is that we divide the nonverbal with the quantitative score divided by 2. If the child were to reach a 98th percentile on either one of those scores, they would proceed to a psych assessment. The GRS is factored in so that if the GRS is lower than a certain threshold score, it mitigates the process in the sense that a lower GRS score would sort of keep the child from going on to a psych assessment, even if they were to have received a 98th percentile. So the two work in tandem, but the GRS does act as a gating feature to restrict the child going forward to a psych assessment.
So I can assume that it's not a objective weighted scale, but rather a professional judgment with the GRS that gets them there?
That is correct.
Thank you. In terms of the report then says, then we have the students' intellectual, academic, and GRS results placed in a decision matrix. What you're describing that decision matrix?
Yes.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. If criteria are met, then there's consideration for an IPRC or in-school enhanced program. So it says and or. Am I to assume by that the IPRC and the in-school enhanced program, that one is more preferred than the other, or is it just a placement verification there?
I would say that many parents prefer the contained class option, but there are some parents that decide to have their child remain in an integrated setting with in-school support, but they may want to revisit that option when the child is completing grade 8, so that they might be interested in going on to a secondary program that is in the gifted stream.
Great, thank you. So you provide the parent with that choice, is that correct?
The parent is provided that choice, yes.
Great, thank you. With respect to the GRS, is this something that is being considered to be removed altogether? And if not, will there be a way to build teacher capacity to assess students with minimal bias? And I know that you've spoken to that in your points, your third and fourth nugget on page 126 of the agenda. You've sort of alluded to that. But I guess the initial question, Doctor, is if the GRS is something that is being considered to be removed altogether.
Thank you for the question. We are looking carefully at the utility of the GRS and whether it contributes to the information provided to give us a profile of the student that might be helpful. We are quite positive that we would prefer it not to be a gating measure. I think the publisher would say that the intention of the GRS was not to act as a gating measure. One thing that I did want to add was that there are inherent biases to our current interpretation of the GRS. In other words, we've selected only 3 of the 6 or 7 subscales that are part of it. There are other subscales such as leadership and artistic ability that we may want to look at and take that information into consideration going forward. So again, we are looking at the GRS as a possible source of information without a gating feature. However, there are other rating scales that are out there that are being used, and there is good research data that suggests that they may be considered as well. So we are looking at a number of those psychometric measures out there.
Great, thank you. And is there thought being given to build teacher capacity on how to make some sense out of this?
Oh, definitely. We are creating a color-coded placemat in which we are looking at many of the gifted traits that sort of permeate across cultures, but also to focus in on specific groups that are underrepresented. And we certainly would like to build capacity in not only teachers, but also the research shows that parents are not real familiar with gifted traits as well. So we would like to build that capacity as well. So we're quite excited about that.
Thank you, appreciate that. In Appendix 1, do we have any, it was A.D. Graywall also referred to this in terms of the gender disparity. Do we have any understanding or perhaps some professional speculation as to why such disproportionality exists within gender? And I ask that question just so that you know the background, is it would seem that the parallel gender analysis of high success within the classroom, especially at secondary when we look provincial averages, is skewed the other way. So is there any sense of, have we kind of teased out a little bit to find out why such a gender disproportionality?
Thank you for the question again. We've noticed that the CCAT seems to be inherently somewhat biased, so that if we're using the CCAT as a universal screener, as the literature calls it, we want to understand why it is that the CCAT is already disadvantaging according to gender, especially in the previous versions of the CCAT, and I think we're continuing to see that today. So I think our number one focus will be on why it is that that measure is doing that and whether we can mitigate that in some authentic way. But that's certainly something that we are looking into.
Great, thank you for that. In terms of the numbers on that same appendix where we've identified that 1,161 out of 112,747 students identify as gifted seems to be approximately maybe a little over 1%, about 1% perhaps. Is this considered to be a provincial average? Is that what we would expect? So that's question one. And secondly, are most of these students in a particular region of the board, or do we find them scattered throughout?
That again, I'm less familiar with the actual details of the data at this point. I think our research department generated that data. Can we come back with a more detailed response there, perhaps?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, I just wanted to sort of get a sense of whether that's the case or not. It would be helpful if we could know that, just to kind of tease out a little bit more from there. But yeah, appreciate that. And finally, Dr. Kwan, just when we examine the SVI variables, again, research might be better to answer this question as well. Just wondering, why did we choose to go with difference rather than the disproportionality index here? And I can see that for some variables where there's monetary issues that are kind of present, that the difference would make would give us some insight. But in the other ones, do you think that the disproportionality index might provide a better insight? And research might be able to share some light on that as well. So if you have any ideas, great. If not, fully understand.
Yes, thank you for your understanding. I believe research might be in a better position to answer that specific question.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for your time this evening, Dr. Kwan. Thank you for your analysis. It was very, very helpful. Thank you, AD Graywall and Director Russell Rollins. I will be in receipt of the report.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 8.6. Peel District School Board Teacher Hiring Policy Development, Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. This evening, this report will be presented by Associate Director Pauline Grewal.
Great, thank you. Through you, Supervisor. In front of you, we have a report on the PDSB Teacher Hiring Policy Development Update. In terms of background, as you would know, on October 15th, the government announced that Regulation 274 would be revoked effective October 29th. This report provides a summary in terms of what we are doing as a board. First and foremost, it is important to remember that as the government revoked and made this announcement, they provided an interim hiring policy that did come into effect on October 29th. We have adopted the ministry's interim hiring process. The only piece and caveat that we added to the attached document that you have there is that we thought it was critical, given the PDSB context, that it was important to value the lived experiences of applicants and ensuring that the hiring processes included opportunities for candidates who reflect the communities and students of Peel. So that was the one addition that we added to the interim process that is in the appendix. The government has asked us to create a policy through a draft PPM, and we're still waiting for a finalized PPM from them with the following expectations that include diversity, equity, and human rights, so having that lens, qualifications and merit, looking at the notion of employment mobility, fairness and transparency, and then monitoring and evaluation. So it's no longer okay just to say that we're doing this, it's how do you know that it's making a difference, and I think it connects really nicely with the work that we're doing around the ministry directions and the accountability piece that Director Russell Rollins spoke about earlier. So currently, in terms of where we are in the development of this policy, we do have a subcommittee that is starting to work on the new policy as we wait for the ministry's final PPM. So following the requirements in the interim PPM, a draft policy is being worked on, and we are incorporating the consultation feedback provided by the board's Focused Recruitment Steering Committee and the Equity Office. So you may recall that we have a focused recruitment initiative where we looked at hiring Black and Indigenous educators, and at this point it was an entry point into the occasional teacher list. Through that process, we've learned lots, and we've been able to apply an anti-racism and anti-oppression framework. So that is providing the basis as we're starting to work on a draft policy that hopefully we'll be able to bring back to the board in January. It's important to remember as we're looking at teacher hiring, as much as people think it's a staff piece, there's a whole student learning and well-being piece connected to this. We know that the quality of teaching is the most critical component in a school board's impact on student learning and achievement. And the development of a new hiring policy along with any kind of requisite operating procedures has to be developed in a way that supports the board's broader mandates on addressing anti-Black racism and any other forms of discrimination. And and we know that because without there's no excellence without equity. And it's important to note that students engage with staff in productive ways when staff is reflective of their lived experiences and their intersectional identities. So we are waiting for the Ministry of Education's teacher hiring PPM. We are waiting for that. And once we have that, the ministry had hoped that every board would have this in place by December 31st, 2020. However, because that PPM has not been finalized, we hope to bring back a policy for approval to the board in January 2021 or February 2021, depending on when we get the ministry PPM. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Thank you for another wonderful report this evening as well. Just a couple of questions. Could you please identify some of the key differentiators between the interim policy and the previous one?
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. I would ask Superintendent Jamie Robertson to answer that question.
Thank you, Interim Director Russell Rawlings, and through you, Supervisor. The significant differences are that the regulation previously required a process of shortlisting that involved the seniority numbers for the occasional teaching staff associated with the panel, and it was associated with regard to qualifications and their seniority number, whereas the interim policy that is in place currently allows the board to consider other factors such as the needs of a particular school, the qualifications. It broadens the components of the elements in terms of the shortlisting. It also allows for a consideration of the needs of the school in terms of lived experience, in terms of experience and knowledge of assets that we would value in Peel District School Board, such as skill and experience working with marginalized youth and knowledge of anti-Black racism, and also working within an anti-oppressive context. So it does provide that context, and that's something that we're looking to leverage going forward.
Thank you, Superintendent Robertson. Can I assume from that I don't need to necessarily follow the seniority process then in those situations?
And thank you, Supervisor. That's correct. The interim policy does still allow for some consideration for the LTO list, which is a seniority-based process. The interim PPM, the draft PPM, does not include that LTO list. So we'll eliminate the requirement to be based upon that. And even within the interim policy, there is a much greater opportunity for boards to consider other assets, such as the identity of the staff coming in. And this is seen as a great opportunity for Peel District School Board.
Thank you, Superintendent Robertson. My final question on the report is, under the conflict of interest guidelines, you speak to the necessity to recuse oneself in the situations of nepotism and cronyism. Are there consequences for those who do not declare a conflict and it later becomes known?
And thank you for that question, Supervisor. The current Peel District School Board conflict of interest policy has significant consequences for employees who do not follow the process, including a declaration of conflict of interest, up to and including termination. So it is a significant consequence. I would also add that it would be prudent for the board to review the conflict of interest policy, and I would anticipate that we will be, given the context of the incoming PPM coming forward, that would be a step that we would be taking. But the conflict of interest policy that the board currently has is significant and does take considerable consideration to the declaration of conflict of interest.
Thanks, appreciate that. And I know that it's present. I guess my question more specifically would be, do we enforce it?
Thank you for the question, Supervisor. Yes, currently within our processes, we require those who are involved in staffing to declare if they have a conflict of interest. In fact, we also expect that they will declare that they have no conflict of interest with every hiring panel that they're involved in, that they are expected to complete a no conflict of interest declaration. We also have a process of auditing associated with that, and we are in the process of reviewing our current auditing data. So again, it is something we take very seriously.
Thanks, Superintendent Robertson. Thanks, A.D. Grewal, and thanks, Director Russell Rollins. I am in receipt of this report. Moving on to 8.7, Peel District School Board Policy 56, Occupational Health and Safety, Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. Associate Director Gill will present this report.
To you, Supervisor Rodriguez. Under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the board is required to review and approve the Occupational Health and Safety Policy annually. The policy attached to this report has been reviewed through an equity, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and human rights lens. The changes have been bolded and underlined. I'm going to ask Superintendent Robertson to highlight the key points of the policy.
Thank you very much, Associate Director Gill, and through you, Supervisor. The significant areas, first off, I will highlight that the process is a compliance component associated with the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The Act requires that school boards and other employers annually review their policies associated with the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the policies within the organization. In a previous board, we did bring forward an unamended policy and did so because of the lack of change within the legislation, but within recognizing the context we were within. And thank you very much for your question, Supervisor, in a previous meeting about our analysis within the context of Peel School Board and the notion of viewing such policy through an anti-oppression lens. We have convened a small committee to examine the policy and to consider the emerging anti-oppression framework that the board is working upon, and did make a number of revisions to the policy that you will see that are underlined. We also are anticipating in the upcoming employment system review that our external expert will be reviewing the policy and will be providing us with advice about amendments and changes that we would be making that would reduce barriers to employees within the Peel District School Board. So, and I am open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Robertson and AD Gill. Thank you for bringing the policy back with the appropriate changes. I don't have any questions. I really appreciate you including the lens focused on dismantling oppressive systems and structures. And I certainly believe that it's a great first step and one that will get probably even better the next time the policy comes up for revision and approval as the work becomes more integrated. So really appreciate the way it's been handled and look forward to seeing it again. And for this one, I approve policy 56. Thank you for your work, Associate Director Gill and Superintendent Robertson and Director Russell Rollins. Moving on to 8.8, borrowing resolution for school board current expenditures 2021. Director Russell Rollins.
I would ask Associate Director Gill to present this report.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins, and through you, Supervisor Rodriguez. The borrowing resolution in front of the board, if approved, will allow the board to borrow funds for a short period to meet its ongoing expenditures. So this normally happens when there is a time gap between the payment of our expenditures and when the board receives funds either from the ministry or through the local municipality. The resolution also authorized the Associate Director of Operations and Equity to apply board revenue to repay the borrowed funds as well as the interest charges.
Thank you, Associate Director Gill. I just have one question. Is the amount being requested for approval a percentage of the budget, or is it sort of a standard amount that we normally would approve?
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, this is based on our past experience from previous years, that the amount that we feel will require throughout the year based on, I just mentioned before, the gap and the time gap between that fund time we receive the funding and the time we have to pay our expenditures. So this is based on our past experience. So this way, this amount which is been requested as part of the resolution will allow us to make sure that we have enough funds available all the time to meet our obligations.
And what's our level of risk?
There is no risk associated with the borrowing resolution. We do receive the funding. It's usually the timing issue. There is definitely a commitment from the ministry to the board to provide those funds.
Thank you. Appreciate that, AD Gill. Thank you, Director Russell Rollins, and I approve the borrowing resolution for school board current expenditures 2021. Moving on to items for receipt, specifically item 9.1 for a moment. The Ministry of Education directions to the Peel District School Board, directives pertaining to governance and Board of Trustees. There are 9 of the 27 directives that are pertinent to governance and the Board of Trustees, and the report briefly outlines where we currently are with respect to each of these 9 directives. And I just want to let you know that I'm in receipt of the report and request that it please be submitted to the ministry. And then for receipt 9.2 and 9.3, I'm in receipt of those items, 9.2 and 9.3, and will await the other minutes and recommendations in the forthcoming meetings. And finally, item 10, communications for action or receipt. I'm in receipt of the communication from Dr. Lawrence Lowe and thank him for his communication and continued good work with the region of Peel Health. Thank you, Dr. Lawrence Lowe. I believe that brings to the end the business of the meeting for this evening, and this meeting is now adjourned. Thanks. Have a great evening.